All right, stand right here for me. I need your license.
What's the reason for the stop?
We'll get to that. Just give me your license.
I will. Tell me the reason first so we're clear on the record. Then
You were driving kind of irregular back there, and your tag, something with your tag.
Violation specifically, speed, lane.
What happens when an arrogant police officer tries to illegally detain a black prosecutor? The answer isn't what you'd expect. This shocking true story showed how one prosecutor's composure and legal precision turned a routine traffic stop into the kind of documented mess that can trigger a federal civil rights investigation and put an officer's career under a microscope. And before we rewind, tell me where you're watching from right now, country or state, in the comments. And if you like stories where accountability wins because the facts are recorded and clean, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now here's what was happening in that moment. Officer Ryan Miller was standing at the driver's window with his posture already set, like he had decided the ending. He was demanding that attorney Danielle Johnson step out of the vehicle. Danielle was seated upright, seatbelt off, hands visible, voice controlled. Instead of reacting emotionally, she was doing the one thing that makes shaky authority fall apart later. She was asking precise, procedural questions and making sure the timeline stayed clear. Miller treated her questions like a challenge. Danielle treated them like documentation. This was early evening on a weekday, the kind of time when people were still out running errands and traffic cameras were active at intersections. Danielle had just left the courthouse area and was driving home in business casual clothes with a work bag on the passenger seat. She wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, wasn't blasting music. She looked like what she was. Someone coming off a long day and trying to get home. The patrol car pulled behind her, lights came on, and Danielle did what most careful drivers do. She signaled, slowed, and stopped safely in a well-lit area. No sudden movements, no arguing from the start. The first few seconds were quiet, but the tone wasn't. Miller approached fast and tight to the vehicle, talking immediately. He didn't lead with a clear reason for the stop. He jumped into a controlling script and kept shifting the explanation while watching her face more than her documents. He floated one reason, then another, like he was trying to find a justification that sounded solid on a body camera. That's a common pivot when the original reason is weak. It's not always about the traffic issue. Sometimes it's about control. Danielle didn't match his energy. She stayed polite. She kept her hands where the camera could see them. She answered what she could without oversharing. Then she asked the question that matters if this goes any further. What was the reason for the stop? And what violation was being claimed? Miller didn't like that. He talked over her and repeated commands instead of clarifying. He treated her request for the legal basis like it was disrespect. Danielle didn't threaten him, didn't drop titles like a weapon, and didn't try to win the stop in the moment. She simply identified herself as a prosecutor because she knew how quickly a stop could get twisted when an officer decided the driver needed to be put in their place. She offered her bar card and office identification in a controlled way, and she asked for a supervisor if he wasn't sure what he was looking at. That was an off-ramp. A normal officer takes that off-ramp. Verification is easy. Supervisor call is routine. Everyone goes home. Miller ignored it. He dismissed her credentials like they didn't matter and returned to commands. He escalated from a traffic stop into a power test. He demanded she step out of the vehicle, but he still hadn't pinned down a stable reason for the stop, and he hadn't explained what crime or offense he believed justified escalating the encounter. Danielle didn't refuse in a dramatic way. She did what experienced attorneys do when they sense an unlawful detention forming. She stayed calm and started building the record out loud. She asked whether she was being detained. She asked for the specific offense. She asked the legal basis for ordering her out. She asked if she was free to leave once identification was verified. Those questions are not insults. They are guardrails, and on camera, they matter. Miller's response was the turning point because he didn't answer the substance. He reframed her questions as argumentative, and treated her calm clarification requests like interference. Then he raised the stakes by claiming she was being detained, while still failing to lock in a clear justification that matched his earlier statements. At that point, this wasn't about a traffic violation anymore. This was about an officer using authority to punish someone for not performing fear. Danielle stayed consistent. She didn't lecture, she didn't insult him. She made it clear she would comply with lawful orders, but she would not consent to unlawful detention. And she kept her voice steady on purpose because calm reads as credible, and credibility matters when the video gets reviewed later by people who weren't there. Miller called for backup. 2 additional officers arrived within minutes. And you could see the dynamic shift immediately. They weren't sure why they were there. They were reading Miller's body language more than they were reading facts. That's how these situations get dangerous fast. The first officer frames the driver as difficult, and everyone else assumes the problem must be the driver. But backup also meant more cameras and more witnesses. Danielle repeated her identification. She repeated her request for a supervisor. She asked whether the other officers' body cameras were activated. She asked for names and badge numbers, not aggressively, just clearly, like someone taking notes in real time. That's when Miller made the worst decision of the entire encounter. He doubled down. He ordered her out again. Danielle complied physically because she understood the roadside is not the courtroom, and compliance with movement does not equal consent to unlawful detention. She stepped out without sudden motions. She didn't resist. She didn't posture. She moved exactly the way someone moves when they know every frame is being recorded and every accusation later will be compared to video. Miller then held her at the rear of the vehicle or near the curb while he kept talking in circles about why this was happening. The justification continued to shift, and every shift made the timeline cleaner for Danielle and worse for him. The body cam didn't just show what was said. It showed the sequence. Unclear stop reason. Refusal to verify credentials. Escalation triggered by questions. Then detention framed as obstruction without actual obstruction. Danielle didn't argue on the roadside. She didn't give them a moment to label as aggressive. She did something more damaging than arguing. She put preservation on the table while the cameras were still running. She stated that she would file a formal complaint and request preservation of all video, dispatch logs, and radio traffic tied to the stop. That sentence changes behavior because it tells everyone listening that this won't be reduced to a vague report later. It will be matched against hard records, and in that moment, you could feel the shift, not a de-escalation, a recalculation. Because once a calm prosecutor starts naming the evidence out loud, the encounter stops being a confidence game and starts being an accountability problem. Miller tried to end the stop the way officers end stops when they want the moment to disappear. He softened his voice, shifted into a closing tone, and acted like the detention had been routine. He handed back her documents, gave a vague warning that didn't match the earlier reasons, and started walking away like the encounter had concluded on his terms. Danielle didn't chase an argument. She didn't demand an apology on the roadside. She did the thing that actually matters later. She confirmed on camera whether she was free to leave and whether the detention was over. She also confirmed the identities of the officers present and whether their cameras were active. She didn't need their cooperation for that to matter. The body cam audio captured it either way. Then she drove away. And this is where Miller made his second mistake. He assumed the stop ended when the car pulled off. Danielle went home, set her bag down, and treated it like a civil rights issue with a checklist. Not a personal insult, not a bad night. A documented event with evidence that could be preserved or lost, depending on what she did next. Within hours, she drafted a preservation request. It wasn't emotional. It was structured like something written by someone who lives inside timelines for a living. She requested retention and preservation of body camera footage from every officer on scene, dash camera footage from Miller's unit, dispatch recordings and radio traffic for the incident window, CAD logs, and call notes showing why backup was requested. Any supervisor notifications, even if no supervisor arrived on scene. GPS AVL data showing unit locations and arrival times. Copies of any written reports submitted, including drafts and supplements. Any nearby fixed camera footage if the city had traffic cameras on that corridor. She sent it to Internal Affairs, the department's records custodian, and the city's legal office. She also submitted a formal complaint, not just about demeanor, but about the core issues: shifting justification for the stop, refusal to verify credentials, escalation based on rights-based questions, detention without a clear lawful basis, and threats of arrest framed as obstruction when she wasn't interfering. The next day, the department did what departments do when they realized a stop didn't go their way on camera. They went into risk management mode. Internal Affairs pulled the footage fast. The city attorney's office asked for an early summary. A command staff member flagged it for review before it hit social media. Because even without the public, the problem was already obvious. Danielle's questions were calm, the officer's answers were unstable, and the timeline didn't support his escalation. The first review meeting wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, and that was worse for Miller. They watched the start of the stop and immediately saw the issue. Miller didn't anchor the reason for the stop in a consistent way. He moved from one explanation to another while controlling the interaction and resisting basic clarifying questions. That pattern matters because lawful stops are built on specific observations. When the reason shifts on camera, it looks like justification hunting. Then they watched the moment Danielle identified herself. She didn't announce it like a threat. She offered credentials and asked for verification. That was the clean off-ramp. Miller ignored it and escalated anyway. That's the part departments hate, because it cuts off the usual defense. If verification was offered and refused, it's hard to claim confusion later. Then they watched the escalation sequence. This is where the power chess game became visible, even to people who weren't there. When backup arrived, the department expected that moment to support Miller. Instead, it created more footage showing uncertainty. One backup officer asked basic clarifying questions that indicated they didn't understand the reason for the detention. Another stood in a posture that signaled that they were waiting for Miller to justify the situation. On camera, it looked like Miller was leading the scene by force of personality, not by clear facts. After the video review, Internal Affairs did what they always do next. They compared the footage to policy. And policy is where Miller got boxed in. Most departments have guidance separating a consensual contact, a detention, and an arrest. They also have rules about ordering a driver out, articulating safety concerns, and documenting probable cause or reasonable suspicion. The video showed commands first and reasons second. It showed a detention that formed before a stable explanation existed. Then came the paperwork problem. Miller still had to write a report, and reports create exposure when they don't match video. Internal Affairs knew that. The city attorney knew that. Everyone knew that. When the report came in, it followed a predictable pattern. It tried to turn the stop into a clean story after the fact. It described behavior in a way that sounded more threatening than what the camera showed. It framed questions as interference. It emphasized non-compliance, even though Danielle complied with movement and kept the situation physically calm. Internal Affairs didn't need to argue with the report. They just laid it beside the footage. And the mismatches popped immediately. The stated reason for the stop didn't match the first reason Miller gave on camera. The justification for ordering her out was described as safety-based, but the video showed the order coming after procedural questions. The obstruction narrative didn't match her conduct, which was controlled and cooperative in all physical respects. The detention timing didn't line up with any clear escalation of risk. This is where departments start thinking beyond discipline and into credibility, because credibility affects court. And Danielle wasn't just any complainant. She was a prosecutor. If an officer gets tagged as unreliable, it doesn't only impact this stop, it impacts every case he touches. That's why command staff moved quickly. Miller was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, not because the department suddenly discovered morality overnight, because keeping him on the street while the footage existed was a liability. The department also issued internal instructions to preserve all related materials, because deletion allegations make everything worse. Internal Affairs then interviewed the backup officers separately. This part matters because backup officers often reveal what the lead officer won't. They described arriving without a clear understanding of why the stop escalated. They described Miller as already agitated. They described Danielle as calm and procedural. And those statements lined up with the footage. By the end of that week, the department had a problem that couldn't be contained inside a single complaint file. Because if Miller did this to a prosecutor with credentials and composure, the obvious question became, what did he do to regular black drivers who didn't know the right questions to ask, or didn't feel safe enough to ask them? That's when Internal Affairs widened the review. They pulled Miller's prior stops, not all of them, the ones that fit a pattern, complaints about attitude, stops with vague reasons, detentions that escalated quickly, incidents where people said they were punished for questioning. They checked for repeat locations, repeat excuses, repeat escalation language. And they found enough to make the city nervous. The city attorney's office started calculating exposure, not just for Danielle's case, but for pattern evidence. If the department had ignored earlier warning signs, that's not just one officer's misconduct. That's supervision failure. Meanwhile, Danielle did something else that kept the pressure on without turning it into a media circus. She filed a parallel notice with the city's risk management office and requested confirmation that all evidence was preserved. She also requested a supervisor review and the final disposition of the complaint. She didn't threaten. She documented. She forced deadlines and created a paper trail that couldn't be buried quietly. And here's the part that made leadership sweat. Danielle's complaint wasn't written like a rant. It was written like a case file. Clear timeline, specific conduct, specific policy conflicts, specific requested records. That's how you turn a viral-looking incident into an accountability process that keeps moving even when people want it to stop. By the time the department tried to draft a public statement, they were already behind the evidence. Because the evidence was their own footage, their own radio traffic, and their own reports. And once that kind of record exists, the next step is predictable. Outside eyes start getting interested. The department's first instinct was containment. They knew Internal Affairs could handle policy violations, but this wasn't staying inside the building. Too many factors made it bigger. Multiple body cameras, inconsistent stop reasons, a detention that formed without a stable legal basis, and an officer who wrote a report that didn't match the footage. And then there was Danielle's role. She wasn't just filing a complaint. She was forcing a record into existence with preservation requests, timestamps, and formal notices that created accountability pressure from multiple angles. Within days, the city attorney's office requested full case materials, not just a summary. Risk management asked for an exposure assessment. Command staff asked how quickly Miller could be removed from field duty without making it look like retaliation against a complainant. Miller stayed on administrative leave. His unit access was restricted. His camera evidence was treated like evidence, not like an internal inconvenience. Then the problem expanded again. Danielle's complaint triggered outside requests. Local oversight groups filed records requests. Community advocates asked whether this was a one-time incident or a pattern. Reporters started asking the same questions city attorneys were already asking privately. If this is what happened when the driver stayed calm and knew procedure, what happened in stops where the driver didn't? That's when the department started pulling more of Miller's history. Internal Affairs reviewed earlier stops with the same markers: escalating tone, vague justification, command-heavy approach, and obstruction language that showed up whenever a driver asked basic questions. They compared those stops to Bodycam, dispatch logs, and outcomes. They looked for repeated locations and repeated narratives. This wasn't a fishing trip. It was triage. If a pattern existed, leadership had to know before someone else proved it. The review produced enough concerns that the department brought in higher-level supervision, including training and standard staff. That's when the conversation shifted from discipline to credibility damage. Because once an officer's credibility gets questioned, prosecutors can't safely use them as a witness the same way. Cases get challenged. Defense attorneys ask for body cam and discovery and start finding inconsistencies. Judges start paying attention. It becomes a ripple that reaches far beyond one traffic stop. And this is where it got tense in a very specific way. Danielle worked in that same system. She wasn't using her position to protect herself. She was forcing the system to apply its own rules to one of its own people. That makes departments nervous because it removes their ability to manage the narrative quietly. As the review continued, the department faced two hard options. Option 1, treat it as a minor complaint, hope it fades, and risk a bigger explosion later when the footage surfaced anyway. Option 2, treat it as a serious rights issue, take visible action, and accept the fallout. They chose the second option because the first one becomes impossible when the record is clean and time-stamped. Miller's status shifted from simple leave to a formal internal investigation with a focus on unlawful detention and retaliation-type behavior. Investigators looked closely at the moment the stop stopped being about traffic and became about control. They documented every time he changed the reason for the stop. They documented how he handled her identification. They documented how quickly he used detention language once he was being questioned. They also examined whether he made false or misleading statements in his report. That part is a career killer because it's not about attitude. It's about truthfulness. If a department decides an officer is unreliable, it impacts everything they do. The city's response started stacking up. A notice went out reinforcing that questions from a driver are not automatically interference. Supervisors were reminded that contested stops required intervention, not silence. Training staff began drafting updated guidance around detention versus a voluntary encounter, and how officers must articulate reasons consistently. Those changes weren't a victory yet. They were a sign the department knew the footage created risk. Then the outside pressure became formal. Danielle's complaint packet, combined with the department's own evidence, reached state-level oversight and civil rights reviewers. That didn't happen because a stop felt rude. It happened because the documentation suggested a rights violation and because the review hinted at potential patterns. Federal civil rights attention has a very specific impact on a department. It changes the way leadership talks. It changes what they preserve. It changes how quickly they move. Once federal reviewers are involved, it's not enough to say, "We handled it internally." They have to show procedures, training, supervision practices, and whether the department ignored warnings. And Danielle understood that from the beginning. That's why she didn't treat this like a social media moment. She treated it like a case file. The department's public posture shifted into careful messaging. They emphasized process. They referenced ongoing investigations. They avoided admitting fault while quietly preparing for a civil claim. Behind the scenes, the city attorney's office ran numbers, not just for Danielle's damages, but for litigation risk if pattern evidence grew. They discussed how a jury might view a detention that formed because a black woman calmly asked for a legal basis. They discussed whether Miller could remain employed if his credibility was damaged. Then the consequences landed in layers. First, Miller lost patrol status for good while the investigation was active. His special assignments were removed. His access to certain duties was restricted. Next came the employment outcome. When the department concluded he violated policy and mishandled the stop, they moved to terminate or push a resignation in a way that would hold up under review. They also had to consider decertification pathways because credibility and truthfulness issues can follow an officer beyond one department. Then came the civil side. Danielle's legal filing was structured the way you'd expect from someone who builds cases for a living: timeline, evidence list, records requests, and claims focused on unlawful detention and retaliatory escalation. The strength wasn't emotion. The strength was how hard it was to dispute the record. The city entered settlement discussions while simultaneously preparing for the possibility of litigation. That's standard when the video is a problem and the plaintiff is precise. But the bigger impact wasn't money. It was the exposure. Because once the department started responding to federal-level inquiries, they had to answer questions they couldn't dodge. How officers were trained to explain stops, how supervisors intervened during contested encounters, how complaints were tracked, and whether repeat allegations were ignored. That forced institutional change. The department rolled out updates that looked like new rules, but were really rules that should have been enforced all along. Clear separation of what counts as a voluntary encounter versus a detention. Requirements to articulate a stable reason for a stop and to stop escalating when that reason isn't there. Mandatory supervisor involvement when a stop becomes contested or a driver requests verification and the officer refuses. Reinforcement that a driver asking procedural questions is not obstruction by itself. Audits of Bodycam and reports for consistency, with consequences for narrative padding. And Danielle's role in the final outcome stayed consistent with her behavior at the stop, controlled, direct, and focused on prevention. When she spoke publicly, she didn't frame it as personal revenge. She framed it as a safety and accountability issue. She pointed out the obvious. If she, with credentials and composure, could be detained for asking basic procedural questions, then plenty of people without that knowledge were vulnerable to worse outcomes. That's why this story stuck, not because it was loud, because it was clean. The officer expected fear, confusion, and compliance. Instead, he got a person who understood procedure better than he did and treated documentation like a shield. The department expected a complaint they could manage. Instead, they got a timeline they couldn't explain away. So here's the question for you. In that situation, would you have known what to ask without escalating the danger? Would you have thought to focus on the record instead of the argument? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share the story with someone who needs the reminder that calm documentation can change outcomes. And if you want more stories like this, where accountability wins because the truth is recorded, make sure you like and subscribe.
All right, what are you doing back here? Let me see your ID.
What's the reason for asking?
Because you're in a back lot at night. ID, now.
I can't discuss details out here. I'm requesting a supervisor for verification.
No, you're going to answer me. Who are you?
I'm part of a federal operation nearby. I need discreet verification, supervisor only.
Oh yeah, federal? That's what you're going with? Hands behind your back.
All right.
A power-tripping patrol officer thought he could turn a routine, suspicious person contact into an easy arrest, then justify it later with a report full of assumptions. What he didn't know was that the calm man standing in front of him, plainclothes, no attitude, no panic, was an undercover federal agent working an active operation nearby. And the second the officer decided to make it a power contest, he set off a chain reaction that would end his career on camera. At this moment, I want to tell you something real. I appreciate you spending your time here. This channel runs on people like you who care about accountability and what the footage actually shows. Now tell me where you're watching from. Country, state, city, drop it in the comments. And if you're into stories where body cams don't let anyone rewrite history, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. All right, here's what happened. The body cam caught the moment already mid-conflict in the rear service lot behind a busy shopping complex. The officer had moved in close and positioned himself to control the man's movement. He was treating the situation like a detention without saying it out loud. His questions weren't investigation. They were challenges. He demanded identification and a reason for being there, but he never clearly explained what crime he believed had happened. The agent stayed controlled, hands visible, minimal movement, no arguing. Special Agent Malcolm Reynolds, a black man working undercover, tried to keep the contact procedural, pushing for verification through a supervisor instead of a backlot debate. That alone triggered the officer. You could see it in how his posture changed and how fast he started stacking commands. He began giving instructions that didn't match each other. He wanted Reynolds to stay still while also repositioning. He treated any attempt to clarify as refusal. Reynolds' calm didn't calm him down. It bothered him. Then the officer made the choice that mattered. He reached for cuffs before he could articulate a clean reason on camera. The arrest formed first. The explanation came later. And that's the hook you need to understand. This wasn't an arrest that happened because facts developed. This was an arrest that happened because the officer decided he was going to win. Now, rewind. It started at Hawthorne Junction, a mixed-use shopping area with restaurants, storefronts, a gym, and constant traffic. The front looked normal because it was normal. The back, where employees and deliveries moved, had service corridors, loading docks, and a dimmer lot that patrol officers liked to check when they felt bored or suspicious. That night, several agencies were quietly running an operation in the area. It wasn't a raid, it wasn't flashy. It was the kind of a long game that depended on people not noticing anything unusual. Undercover agents blended in. Vehicles looked ordinary. Movements were planned. The operation had its own oversight logs and supervisors watching from a distance. Special Agent Malcolm Reynolds was part of that operation. He was dressed like a regular customer. No badge, no tactical gear, nothing that signaled law enforcement. He had a defined task in a specific corridor area and a limited window to do it. He wasn't wandering and he wasn't lost. He was exactly where the plan put him. The risk, though, was baked in. If a local patrol officer got curious at the wrong moment, Reynolds couldn't just announce who he was without blowing the work. Undercover identities were protected for a reason, and those protections often made normal verification impossible through standard dispatch channels. Officer Dalen Kruger rolled through the back lot without a call for service. He saw Reynolds near the service corridor and decided he didn't belong. He approached like he was already sure, and the Bodycam captured it. He closed distance quickly, questioned aggressively, and tried to control the conversation before it even started. Reynolds responded the way professionals did when they were trying not to burn a case. He stayed vague without lying. He asked what he was suspected of. He requested a supervisor. He offered to comply through proper verification instead of giving details in a public lot. Kruger didn't treat that as a safety request. He treated it as defiance. He boxed Reynolds in physically, using positioning to block his path. He pressed for identification, then pressed for answers Reynolds couldn't safely give. The more Reynolds stayed measured, the more Kruger escalated, like he needed him to match his energy, so he could justify what he wanted to do next. Reynolds tried one last move to prevent a disaster without turning it into a public announcement. He indicated he was part of a federal operation and needed a supervisor immediately for verification. Kruger didn't slow down. He doubled down and reframed Reynolds' controlled, careful wording as a lie. And right there, right before the cuffs fully took control of the situation, was the moment everything tipped from annoying contact into department-wide emergency. Kruger reacted to Malcolm Reynolds' controlled identity, hint the worst way possible. He treated it like a challenge and turned it into an accusation. On Bodycam, the shift was obvious. Kruger stopped acting like he was figuring something out and started acting like he was proving something. He framed Reynolds as a liar, trying to talk his way out of a stop. He began repeating the same idea in different forms, that Reynolds was claiming things, that it was fake, that he was not buying it. He didn't treat the possibility of a sensitive operation as a reason to slow down. He treated it as a reason to push harder. Reynolds stayed careful. He didn't start naming agencies out loud. He didn't start listing details about where he'd been or who he was watching. He kept requesting the same solution: supervisor verification, done discreetly, done correctly. That was the professional move, because blurting out federal credentials in a backlot would burn the work instantly. Kruger's response was control, not process. He angled his body to keep Reynolds pinned in place without saying, "You're detained." He kept Reynolds busy with rapid instructions, then treated any pause as defiance. It was a setup that looked clean on paper if you wrote it the right way later. Subject refused commands. But on video, it played like this: conflicting direction, pressure, and a decision already made. Then Kruger escalated to the point of no return. He moved behind Reynolds and ordered his hands back. Reynolds complied. He didn't swing. He didn't pull away. He didn't do anything that looked like aggression. The body cam captured a calm man doing exactly what a trained professional did when he knew the bigger risk wasn't the cuffs. It was the operation collapsing around him. Kruger cuffed him anyway. And once the cuffs clicked, Kruger started building the justification in real time. He labeled Reynolds' earlier requests as refusal. He treated the attempt at discreet verification like impersonation. He treated calm, measured behavior like attitude. It wasn't about safety at that point. It was about being right. Kruger radioed it in like it was routine. He ran the name Reynolds gave him, and he pressed dispatch for confirmation through normal local channels. That was where reality punched a hole through Kruger's confidence. Undercover identities didn't show up like a driver's license check. Protected assignments didn't show up like a regular employment record. A federal agent working a covert operation wasn't supposed to be confirmable by a patrol officer clicking through standard databases. Dispatch came back with nothing useful. And instead of recognizing that "can't confirm" sometimes meant you're out of your lane, Kruger took it as proof that his gut had been right all along. The body cam captured the exact logic loop that destroys careers. No confirmation became guilt, and guilt became permission to keep escalating. Kruger tightened the cuffs, repositioned Reynolds, and started talking like transport was next. He kept Reynolds in the back lot, using his body and stance to control him while waiting for backup. He didn't create a clean moment to de-escalate. He didn't create a clean moment to verify. He created a clean moment to dominate. Meanwhile, the operation around them started reacting. Reynolds had been part of a monitored plan. People were watching lanes, timestamps, and locations. He had check-ins that mattered. He had eyes on him from a distance, even if no one could step in without exposing everything. The second he didn't move the way the plan required, it wasn't just a delay. It was a signal that something had gone wrong. And when the cuffs went on, it became urgent. The quiet federal oversight system moved faster than Kruger understood. Not with sirens at first, with calls, with a chain that didn't argue, with names that didn't need to raise their voice. Kruger didn't see any of that yet. He just saw a man in cuffs and a dispatch screen that didn't validate him, and he treated that as permission to keep going. Then a second patrol unit rolled into the back lot. Backup arrived, and Kruger immediately went into performance mode. Body cam still rolling, posture stiff, voice firm, presenting Reynolds like a problem he'd handled. He didn't ask the other officer to help verify. He pulled them into his version of events. Reynolds stayed composed and did the only thing he could do without burning everything. He repeated that he needed a supervisor and that verification had to happen through the right channel. Kruger responded by tightening the story. He doubled down on the impersonation angle because that was the easiest label to justify why he hadn't slowed down. That was when Kruger made the next mistake. He requested a supervisor too late and for the wrong reason, because now he wanted someone above him to rubber stamp what he'd already done, not to prevent it. And as those words went out over the radio, the federal side was already moving on a different track entirely. Because the moment a patrol officer cuffed a real undercover agent, it stopped being a local decision. It became a department problem. This is where the situation stopped being a patrol officer's good catch and turned into a command-level problem. Sergeant Nina Alvarez arrived first. She walked into the rear service lot and immediately read the scene. Malcolm Reynolds in handcuffs, Kruger standing close, backup nearby, and a posture on Reynolds that didn't match the story Kruger was trying to sell. Reynolds wasn't frantic, wasn't bargaining, wasn't trying to talk his way out. He was controlled and careful, like someone managing what he said because other people were listening. Alvarez didn't start with attitude checks. She started with basics. She asked Kruger what specific crime he believed he had, what facts supported it, and what legal basis existed for putting cuffs on. Kruger's answer came out like a patchwork. He leaned on labels instead of facts, claiming evasiveness, claiming refusal, claiming impersonation, without a clean timeline that justified the jump from suspicious to arrest. Alvarez then turned to Reynolds and kept it tight. She asked for the minimum needed to verify and resolve safely. Reynolds didn't grandstand. He didn't announce agencies in the open lot. He repeated what he had been repeating from the beginning. He could be verified through the correct channel and needed a supervisor to handle it discreetly. That was the moment Alvarez made the first containment decision. She physically separated the two. She positioned an officer with Reynolds, kept his hands safe and visible, and pulled Kruger away so the contact couldn't keep escalating. She understood something Kruger refused to accept. When a person keeps asking for proper verification instead of arguing facts, you slow down, you document, and you elevate. Alvarez radioed for the watch commander. Lieutenant Mark Hensley arrived and didn't waste time. He didn't ask Kruger for a long explanation first. He asked for the Bodycam status, the legal basis, and the verification pathway Reynolds had referenced. Then he spoke to Reynolds briefly, away from Kruger, and got a method to confirm identity through a secure route. Hensley stepped aside and made the call. The Bodycam captured the visible shift when Hensley came back. His posture changed from supervisor responding to incident control. He directed Alvarez to keep Reynolds separated and safe. He instructed the backup unit to hold the perimeter and keep civilians out of the area. He told Kruger to step back and stop treating the situation like it was his scene to manage. Kruger pushed back without saying it outright. He kept trying to justify his decision in fragments, circling the same idea that Reynolds couldn't be confirmed through normal dispatch. Hensley didn't engage with the argument. He treated it as irrelevant. Not confirmable through dispatch was not proof of wrongdoing. In this context, it was the exact reason to stop and verify correctly. Then, the next level arrived. Captain Rourke, the department liaison for interagency coordination, pulled in and went straight to Hensley. He took a quiet call, listened, and walked back with instructions that were not up for debate. Reynolds was uncuffed, not as a favor, as a correction. Alvarez checked Reynolds' wrists and asked if he needed medical attention. Reynolds stayed professional and kept it brief. He was then moved to a secure location away from the public area, away from any chance of his identity being spread further, and away from Kruger, because by that point, the operational damage was already in motion. Reynolds had been on a monitored plan with timestamps and check-ins. When he went static in the back lot, people noticed. When the cuffs went on, the operation had to pivot. Targets didn't wait around. Patterns broke, people moved. The kind of work that took weeks to build could get disrupted in minutes. Hensley's next move showed what the department was afraid of. He secured Kruger's body cam as evidence. He limited access. He directed immediate written statements from the officers present. He instructed Kruger not to finalize a detailed report until command review. This wasn't about protecting Kruger. It was about protecting the department from a video that could not be explained away. Kruger still acted like he could talk his way out of it later, but the chain above him had already switched from patrol handling to liability handling. And on the federal side, Reynolds' team wasn't yelling in the lot. They were documenting, escalating, and starting the formal process that hurt departments the most: complaints, records requests, and legal action. By the end of the night, the scene was contained. Reynolds was secure, and Kruger was sent home under instructions. And the department's biggest problem wasn't just what happened. It was what the footage showed. The department tried to keep it quiet at first. Officer Dalen Kruger was placed on administrative leave within days, officially labeled as pending review. Internally, command treated the whole thing like a containment problem. Control the body cam, control access, keep the paperwork tight, and hope the federal side handled it privately. That hope lasted about as long as it took for formal complaints to land. Special Agent Malcolm Reynolds didn't make it a social media fight. He went through channels that forced documentation. A federal complaint package went in. The operation lead filed an impact report detailing what the arrest disrupted, what evidence got harder to use, and how Reynolds' cover was compromised. Then Reynolds' attorney filed notices that triggered records holds and preservation orders. From that point on, the department couldn't clean it up. They had to keep everything. And the moment the city attorneys got the body cam and radio logs, the strategy shifted again. Because on the footage, Kruger didn't look like an officer making a careful decision. He looked like an officer trying to force compliance first and build justification after. He treated routine questions as defiance. He issued conflicting commands. He escalated to cuffs without clearly stating a lawful basis. Then, when Reynolds tried discreet verification, Kruger reframed it as impersonation and doubled down. That was the problem with Bodycam. It didn't care what the report said later. Charges didn't survive the first real review. Whatever Kruger wrote up as a justification didn't match the timeline the camera recorded. The local prosecutor's office had zero incentive to touch a case that involved a real undercover agent and a video that looked like ego-driven escalation. The criminal side collapsed fast. The civil side did the damage. Reynolds' lawsuit wasn't framed as embarrassment. It was framed as a rights violation, with professional harm attached: wrongful arrest, unlawful detention, and escalation without legal basis. The complaint highlighted that Reynolds attempted de-escalation and requested supervisor verification repeatedly, and Kruger treated that as a reason to push harder. During discovery, it got worse for the department. Training records were requested, policy acknowledgments were requested, prior complaints and internal notes were requested, dispatch recordings were requested, supervisor documentation from earlier incidents was requested. When everything got pulled into one file, the picture turned ugly. Kruger wasn't a one-time mistake. He was a pattern the department had managed until the wrong person ended up in cuffs. The department tried the standard distancing language in public, reviewing the incident, taking it seriously, cooperating with partners. But the footage made spin impossible. Once the video surfaced publicly, people didn't need an interpretation. They watched the body language, the pace, the escalation, and the refusal to verify. Public reaction became the accelerant. Local news ran the simple headline, "Everyone understood." A patrol officer arrested an undercover federal agent during an active operation. Online, the clip spread because it wasn't complicated. It was a power trip caught clean. Kruger's union tried to frame it as uncertainty in a backlot with limited information. That argument died the moment the timeline was played back. The absence of confirmation was not a reason to escalate. It was a reason to slow down. He did the opposite. The city attorneys did the math. A jury watching that body cam wasn't going to reward arrogance. And a jury hearing that the arrest compromised an operation and damaged a federal agent's career path wasn't going to keep the damages small. The case settled. The settlement terms weren't just money. The department agreed to policy changes and retraining with interagency coordination built in. They implemented a verification protocol for potential undercover personnel during street contacts, requiring supervisory response before cuffs in ambiguous impersonation situations, unless there was a clear, immediate threat. They added mandatory review steps for backlot detentions without a call for service. They tightened Bodycam handling rules, so footage couldn't get buried behind informal access limits. Kruger didn't walk away clean. He was terminated after internal findings concluded he escalated without lawful basis and ignored supervisor-level best practices. His certification went under review. His name became tied to a viral Bodycam clip that hiring panels didn't need to debate because they could watch it themselves. Reynolds didn't celebrate. He moved on, but he carried the professional hit, a burned cover, disrupted work, and a case file that forced time away from the job. What he gained was a validation on record, not because anyone was being generous, but because the camera documented reality. And that was the lesson that landed without speeches. This wasn't a trap. It wasn't a gotcha. It was a basic test of restraint. Identify a real reason, slow down, verify through proper channels, and treat people like citizens instead of obstacles. Kruger failed that test on Bodycam, and once the truth was recorded, nobody got to negotiate with it. If you were Reynolds in that moment, how would you have handled it without burning the operation? And if you were the supervisor, what would you have done the second you saw the cuffs? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more stories where accountability wins, because the footage tells the truth, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Hold up a second. Can I see some ID?
What's going on? Why am I being stopped?
This is a controlled area today. I need to know who you are. ID.
I understand. What's the legal basis? Am I suspected of a specific offense or am I being detained?
Just stay right here and show me your ID.
I'm asking for the reason you're holding me.
You're hanging around the venue side. We've had issues. I need.
Officer Kyle Harkins spotted a calm black man in plain clothes leaving a coffee shop near a high-security venue and decided on the spot that he didn't belong. He moved in close, demanded identification, and positioned himself to block the man's path, like he was ready to turn it into a detention, even though he couldn't name a specific crime or point to a real report. Harkins expected the stop to end the usual way. The man gets uneasy, hands over whatever the officer wants, and the officer controls the story. What he didn't know was that the calm man standing there with his hands visible was a U.S. Secret Service agent assigned to an active protective detail, and verification was only a dispatch check away. And he definitely wasn't the kind of person Harkins could pressure into a fake, suspicious narrative without consequences. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your state or country. And if you like stories where calm professionalism and documented footage beat bad authority, hit like and subscribe. This happened on a downtown block built around a luxury hotel and a nearby venue that regularly hosted high-security activity. The area had private security, marked cameras at entrances, and constant foot traffic from guests, staff, and people coming in and out of the shops. Local patrols worked that perimeter because the city wanted a visible police presence, but they were still supposed to follow basic standards, clear reasons, clear communication, and no freelancing stops based on vibes. The man was Marcus Reed. He was in plain clothes, moving like someone on a short break. He walked out of the coffee shop with nothing in his hands that could be mistaken for a weapon. No aggressive posture, no rush, no attempt to avoid attention. He started down the sidewalk toward the hotel side of the block. Harkins watched him and made a decision without facts. He approached fast and came in with demands instead of questions. He immediately demanded ID and started describing Marcus as suspicious. When Marcus didn't instantly comply, Harkins escalated the language and treated it like defiance. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He kept his hands visible and asked for the legal reason for the stop. He also requested a supervisor. He made it clear he would verify his identity through proper channels instead of turning it into a sidewalk argument. Harkins didn't answer the legal basis question. He didn't describe a specific crime. He didn't reference a call for service. He didn't say Marcus matched a suspect description. He kept it vague and kept stacking accusations that sounded serious, but weren't tied to anything concrete. He also stepped closer and positioned himself, so Marcus couldn't simply continue walking. That shift mattered. It wasn't a casual check anymore. Harkins was using his body to control movement, while still refusing to explain what justified the stop. Marcus stayed steady. He repeated the request for the legal basis. He repeated the request for a supervisor. He didn't reach into pockets. He didn't pull out credentials in a heated moment. He kept it safe and controlled, the way trained professionals do when they don't want an officer to later claim they made a sudden move. Harkins took Marcus's calm professionalism as a challenge. He started describing Marcus's behavior as refusing orders. He threatened detention. He acted like Marcus's only choices were immediate compliance or being taken into custody, even though Harkins still hadn't stated what crime he was investigating. And while Harkins was trying to force the encounter into a compliance story, the environment was recording the whole thing. Harkins had his body camera. The hotel's fixed cameras covered the sidewalk and drop-off area. The parking lot cameras covered the pedestrian path. A bystander nearby saw how heated the officer was getting and started recording on a phone from the curbside, capturing the officer's posture, distance, and how he blocked Marcus's movement. Marcus noticed the phone but didn't perform for it. He stayed focused on procedure. He kept his hands visible and kept the interaction simple. He wanted the legal reason stated, he wanted a supervisor, and he would verify identity through official channels. Harkins called for a supervisor, but he framed it like Marcus was the problem. He used radio language that made it sound like a high-risk stop instead of a patrol officer confronting someone without a clear basis. That mattered because it set the tone for the supervisor's arrival. While they waited, Harkins kept pressing. He stayed close. He kept repeating that Marcus was suspicious. He kept pushing for ID on his terms, in that moment, right there on the sidewalk. Marcus kept doing the opposite of what Harkins needed. He stayed polite, stayed still, and kept forcing the issue back to one question. What was the legal reason? This is where stops like this either clean up or collapse. If there's a real reason, it gets stated clearly, and the supervisor backs it. If there isn't, the supervisor starts asking questions the officer can't answer, and the cameras do the rest. And the supervisor was seconds away. Sergeant Elena Cho arrived fast because the call came from a perimeter officer near a high-security venue, and supervisors didn't let those situations drag out. She stepped in, took one look at the spacing and the body positioning, and immediately separated the interaction into two parts, Marcus on one side, Harkins on the other. Cho started by asking Harkins to explain clearly what crime he suspected and what specific facts led to the stop. She didn't ask for a general feeling. She asked for a legal basis that could be written down and defended later. Harkins didn't have one. He tried to keep it in the same vague lane he'd been using, describing Marcus as suspicious and acting like Marcus not handing over ID instantly was the reason for the stop. Cho didn't accept that. She pressed again for a specific suspected offense or a specific report. At the same time, Cho addressed Marcus in a controlled way. Marcus kept his hands visible and stayed calm. He didn't do anything sudden. He didn't reach into pockets while the officer was heated. He told Cho he would verify identity through proper channels and requested the dispatch confirm him. He also indicated he had credentials, but would present them only in a controlled way, with the supervisor managing the exchange. Cho handled it exactly how a competent supervisor handled it in a sensitive area. She had Marcus remain still and asked him to present credentials in a way that didn't create risk or confusion. Marcus produced his credentials carefully, without any fast movements, and kept his posture neutral. Cho looked at them, then immediately moved to verification. She called dispatch and gave them the name and credential details for confirmation. Dispatch came back quickly. The response confirmed Marcus Reed as a U.S. Secret Service agent assigned to an active protective detail connected to the venue activity in that area. It wasn't a maybe. It wasn't a long delay. It was immediate confirmation through official channels. The tone of the stop flipped in a second. Harkins's confidence collapsed because the entire stop had been built on one assumption, that Marcus was powerless and would have to submit to whatever story Harkins wanted to write. Once dispatch confirmed who Marcus was and why he was in that zone, the doesn't belong idea had nothing left. Cho didn't let it turn into a personal moment. She kept it procedural. She directed Harkins to disengage and step back. She made it clear the contact was over and that Marcus was free to continue. Harkins tried to salvage the situation by rewriting what he'd done. He attempted to shift his justification after the fact, implying he was following perimeter security concerns. He leaned on the idea of high alert posture without tying it to any specific behavior Marcus actually showed. He also tried to imply Marcus's calm refusal to provide ID instantly was the problem. Cho didn't accept a rewritten story, especially not with cameras in the area and a bystander recording. She asked again in plain terms what crime Harkins believed had occurred or was about to occur when he initiated the stop. She also asked what specific action Marcus took that created that belief. Harkins still couldn't name one. That was the core issue. Harkins initiated a stop, blocked movement, threatened detention, and escalated language, while never stating a specific suspected crime and never pointing to a specific, observable fact beyond his own assumption. Cho took the next step that mattered for accountability. She ensured the body camera was preserved. She didn't leave it to chance. She made sure it stayed on and that it would be handled as evidence, not treated like a routine upload later. She also directed Harkins to stop engaging with Marcus and stop trying to explain himself on scene. Marcus stayed professional the entire time. He didn't lecture. He didn't humiliate Harkins. He didn't use the moment to posture. He let dispatch confirmation and the supervisor's questions do the work. He verified his identity, confirmed he was assigned, and kept it moving. Cho then addressed Marcus briefly to confirm there were no additional safety concerns and that his detail status wasn't compromised by the interaction. Marcus indicated he was fine and that the verification was the only thing he needed. He returned to his assignment without turning the sidewalk into a scene. Then Cho handled Harkins. She removed him from perimeter duty immediately. She didn't leave him to keep patrolling with the same mindset near a protected site. She directed him back to the station pending a review and informed him he was being placed on administrative status while the incident was assessed. The bystander video was still rolling at that point, and hotel security cameras had captured the stop from fixed angles. That mattered because it meant the department didn't control the only record. Even if someone wanted to soften what happened, the outside footage would still show the spacing, the blocking, the escalation, and the lack of any stated crime. Within hours, the incident was already a problem inside the department. Cho filed an initial supervisor report capturing the key points: where it happened, what Harkins claimed, what he could not articulate, what dispatch confirmed, and what actions were taken immediately. She also flagged the existence of third-party cameras and requested preservation from the hotel's security office. Because the man stopped was on an active protective detail, the review didn't stay local and casual. The verification logs, dispatch records, and communications were all easily retrievable. The department now had an officer who escalated on camera without a legal basis near a high-security site against a federal protective agent who handled it correctly. And at that point, the outcome wasn't going to be negotiated through excuses. It was going to be decided by records, bodycam, security footage, dispatch audio, and the supervisor's documentation of what Harkins could not justify. The department couldn't treat this like a minor complaint because there were too many clean records and too many outside eyes. The stop happened near a high-security venue. The subject was verified as a Secret Service agent on an active detail, and the escalation was captured from multiple angles. Internal Affairs opened the investigation the same day. They pulled the full package immediately. Harkins's body cam, Sergeant Cho's supervisor report, dispatch audio, CAD entries, unit GPS, and the hotel's camera coverage of the sidewalk and drop-off area. They also requested the bystander's video once it surfaced, because it showed the spacing and blocking from a clean angle that didn't depend on police equipment. The investigation was simple because the key question was simple. What was the legal basis for the stop at the moment Harkins initiated it? In Harkins's first explanation, he tried to justify it with general security concerns and suspicious behavior. Investigators asked him to specify what he observed that indicated a specific crime or a specific threat. He couldn't tie it to anything concrete. No matching description, no active call, no identified offense, nothing that would support escalating to blocking movement and threatening detention. Then they compared his explanation to the recordings. The body cam and the other cameras showed Harkins demanding ID first and building reasons afterward. It showed him using vague labels instead of naming a crime. It showed him stepping in and controlling space. It showed him escalating tone, while the other man stayed calm, hands visible, and kept requesting the legal reason and a supervisor. It also showed that once dispatch confirmed the identity and assignment, Harkins's posture changed immediately, which reinforced what the stop was really based on: assumption and dominance, not facts. Sergeant Cho's actions helped lock it down. She had asked Harkins on scene to state the legal basis, separated the parties, confirmed identity through dispatch, and ordered disengagement. She also made sure the body cam was preserved and documented the existence of outside cameras. That meant Harkins couldn't later claim the supervisor agreed with his judgment or that the details were unclear. Once the bystander clip circulated, public pressure hit fast. It wasn't a confusing video. It wasn't a chopped clip that could be dismissed as missing context. Between the phone video, the hotel cameras, and the body cam, the context was complete. The public saw an officer escalate without stating a specific reason, and then shrink the moment verification happened. The department placed Harkins on administrative leave while the investigation ran. Then came the formal discipline. The findings focused on clear policy points: initiating a stop without articulable facts, escalating without a defined suspected offense, using threats of detention to force compliance, and failing to handle a sensitive perimeter assignment with the required restraint and documentation. Harkins's career didn't survive it. He lost his perimeter assignment immediately, and then faced serious discipline through the department process. The outcome was severe because the incident wasn't just embarrassing. It created liability and undermined trust near a protected site. With multiple recordings confirming the same story, there was no realistic way to defend it as a misunderstanding. The department also made changes that were aimed at preventing this exact pattern. They tightened perimeter stop guidelines near high-security venues. They required officers to document the specific legal basis for stops in those zones, and required supervisor notification earlier when a stop was based on a security concern. They also increased body cam review and audits for perimeter units, especially around stops involving identity checks and detentions. Marcus Reed went back to work the same day. He didn't seek attention on the sidewalk, and he didn't turn it into a personal show. The accountability happened afterward, where it belongs, through records and review. The main reason this ended clean was simple. Marcus stayed calm, asked the right question, requested a supervisor, and let verification and cameras do what arguments can't. That's the lesson in this one. When someone with authority can't explain what they're doing, you don't fix it by yelling. You fix it by staying controlled, asking for the legal basis, asking for a supervisor, and making sure the record exists. Because documented truth doesn't negotiate with ego. Now tell me what you would have done. If you were stopped with no clear reason near a high-security area, would you have stayed calm and pushed for verification the way Marcus did? Or would you have reacted differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories where calm professionalism and real accountability win, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Sir, stop right there. Let me see your ID.
Why? What is going on?
Just give me your ID right now.
I paid. I have the receipt in my hand. What item are you saying is missing?
You were acting suspicious. That's enough. ID.
What facts do you have?
Officer Brent Walsh walked into Front Range Outfitters and decided on the spot that a black customer near the exit was a shoplifter. He moved in close, demanded identification, and positioned himself so the man couldn't just walk out, even though nobody had confirmed a missing item. Walsh expected the situation to end the usual way. The customer gets nervous, backs down, hands over whatever the officer wants, and the story becomes whatever the officer says it is. What he did not know was that the calm black man standing near the exit with the receipt in his hand was a head of internal affairs. And he definitely was not the kind of person Walsh could bully without consequences. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and going. Now tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your country or state. And if you like stories where people stay calm, stick to facts, and the record catches up with the truth, hit like and subscribe. This started in Marston, Colorado, inside a mid-sized outdoor store called Front Range Outfitters in a busy shopping district. The front of the store was set up like most retail places, registers close to the entrance and exit, a small open area where people paused after paying, and cameras covering the checkout lanes. A cashier noticed Darius Coleman near the exit and told the officer she wasn't sure about him. That was it. No confirmed missing item, no alarm, no manager saying a product was gone. Just uncertainty. Walsh treated that uncertainty like a confirmed theft. He went straight at Darius and demanded his ID. Darius stayed still, kept his hands visible, and asked why he was being questioned. He asked what item was supposedly taken and what facts Walsh had. Walsh did not give a specific item. He did not reference a report from staff that a product was missing. He kept it general and kept repeating that he believed Darius took something. He also stood close enough that Darius had to look past him to see the doors. The point was clear. Walsh was controlling where Darius could move, even though nothing had been verified. Darius did not match Walsh's energy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get aggressive. He repeated the same questions because those questions matter. What is the reason and what is the actual basis? Walsh started labeling Darius's questions as non-compliance. That's how he pushed it. He acted like the problem wasn't the lack of evidence, but Darius not immediately doing what he was told. Then Walsh radioed for backup. The language he used made it sound like he had an active suspect situation, not a store trying to confirm a receipt. That radio call mattered because it shaped how the next officer would arrive and how serious the situation would feel, especially to customers watching. A store manager stepped in and asked for a minute to verify the purchase. That was the normal next step. Check the receipt against the point-of-sale system and confirm the transaction. Darius already had the receipt in hand and stayed in place while the manager worked. Walsh did not slow down while the manager verified. He kept pressing Darius for ID. He stayed in Darius's space. He kept himself positioned between Darius and the exit. The encounter was now happening right between the registers and the front doors, with customers nearby and store cameras looking down on the whole area. When backup arrived, Officer Sofia Ramirez took a moment to read what was actually in front of her. She saw a normal checkout scene, a manager actively verifying, and a customer holding a receipt and bag. She hesitated because it didn't match the urgency Walsh had put on the radio. Walsh reacted by trying to take control of the scene even harder. He kept directing attention back to his commands and tried to move the situation toward hands-on control, even though the store was still verifying the purchase. That's what made the moment stand out later. It didn't look like an officer waiting for facts. It looked like an officer trying to force a result before the facts cleared the customer. And here's the detail that turned this from a bad stop into a major case later on. Front Range Outfitters store video stayed clear. The camera angles covered the registers in the exit area. The lighting was good. The timing was easy to follow. Walsh's body camera, which should have captured the most important part of the confrontation, ended up unusable at the critical moment. Not the whole interaction, the part that mattered most. In real time, nobody in the store could see how big that would become. They saw an officer pushing a shoplifting accusation without a confirmed missing item, a manager trying to verify, a backup officer hesitating, and Darius staying controlled and asking for a clear reason. That was where it stood right then. Walsh still trying to turn suspicion into control, and Darius refusing to hand him anything he could misuse. The manager finished checking the transaction and confirmed Darius's purchase matched the receipt. There was no missing item tied to him. The store had no loss report, no product description, no inventory alert, nothing that supported what Walsh had been pushing. That should have ended it clean. Instead, Walsh tried to keep the situation on his terms. He stayed close, kept talking like Darius had still needed to prove himself, and acted like the only issue was Darius not cooperating fast enough. He did not switch to an apology. He did not acknowledge that the cashier's uncertainty was not a valid basis for what he'd done. He tried to turn it into a lecture and move on. Officer Ramirez didn't follow Walsh's lead. She stayed focused on what the manager had confirmed. Her posture and pacing made it obvious she didn't see a reason to keep pressing Darius now that the store verification was done. The contrast mattered because anyone watching could see there had been a normal way to handle this, and Walsh chose the aggressive way. Darius kept the same approach he'd used the entire time. He stayed calm. He didn't argue about emotions. He didn't make it personal. He kept it simple and fact-based. He made it clear he was leaving now that the purchase was verified, and he did it without giving Walsh a reaction to claim later. Walsh still tried to control the ending. He lingered, watched Darius move, and looked for a final excuse to justify how far he'd taken it. But with the manager confirming the purchase and another officer standing there, he didn't have room to force it further without exposing himself even more. Darius walked out of Front Range Outfitters as a customer who had done nothing wrong, in front of a store camera that had captured the full encounter from start to finish. That same day, Darius handled it the way a person trained in oversight handled it, through process, not performance. He did not call anyone from the parking lot. He did not threaten anyone. He did not announce who he was to get special treatment. He went through the same public system any resident would use, so the case would be anchored in normal procedure from the first step. He filed a complaint through the department's public channel. He wrote it as a clean timeline, describing what the cashier reported, what Walsh did, what Walsh claimed, how the manager verified the purchase, and how Walsh escalated without a confirmed missing item. He included location details, time window, and identifying information that would help investigators pull the right records. Then he sent a preservation request. He didn't just ask for the body cam. He asked for the full set of material that would show what happened and what decisions were made before and after. He requested preservation of full body cam files, not clips. He requested dispatch and CAD logs. He requested GPS and unit location records. He requested supervisor communications. He requested store video. And he requested POS logs for the transaction and surrounding time window so the verification could be tied to system records. He also requested that no one involved in the incident access or alter-related files. That preservation step was not a dramatic move. It was a standard one. And it mattered because it locked the department into a record before anyone could start cleaning up the story. Only after that process started did the internal reality surface. Darius wasn't just a citizen filing a complaint. He was the department's internal affairs director. Even then, he handled it carefully because he understood what would happen if he touched the case himself. People would say it was personal. People would say it was biased. People would say he used his position to settle a score. So he did the opposite. He formally recused himself from the investigation in writing. He assigned the case to his deputy, Monica Lane, with clear instructions. treat it like any other complaint, follow chain of custody, and document every step. Monica Lane moved fast because she knew the first 48 hours mattered most in cases involving video and digital logs. She issued evidence holds, not suggestions. Holds. She directed that Bodycam files, dispatch recordings, CAD entries, and system access logs be preserved immediately. She notified IT and supervision, so nobody could later claim they didn't know material had to be protected. She also contacted Front Range Outfitters to secure the store's exports properly. She didn't accept someone texting a clip. She arranged formal exports with timestamps, system identifiers, and documented handling. She treated the store video and POS logs as evidence, not content. When she received the store footage, she logged it, verified it, and preserved the original export. She documented who provided it, when it was pulled, and how it was transferred. That mattered because the store video was going to be the cleanest, most neutral record of what happened at the front doors. The department's initial reaction was quiet containment. Walsh was pulled to administrative duty. He was instructed not to access case-related materials. On paper, that looked like standard procedure while a complaint was reviewed. But Lane treated it as a risk point because she knew what sometimes happened when an officer believed video or reports could end their career. She began building the timeline the right way: store video timestamps, POS verification times, dispatch calls, and officer arrival windows. She started lining up the records that should match each other if everything was normal. And she flagged one issue immediately for follow-up. Walsh's body cam coverage didn't match what it should have captured. The store video had a clear view during the most critical part of the encounter, but the body cam record from Walsh wasn't clean in that same window. That mismatch was going to become a major point, because it wasn't just about what happened in the store. It was about whether the official police record had been protected or manipulated. Lane didn't jump to conclusions. She did what investigators do. She treated it as a technical problem until the logs proved otherwise. But she also knew something important already. Walsh's decisions were now locked against a clear store camera angle. And Darius had already requested the full set of records that would show who touched what and when. Monica Lane treated the complaint like an evidence case. She rebuilt what happened using records that could be checked and matched. She started with the store side because it was outside police control. She obtained the full camera export covering the registers and the exit, along with the POS logs for the same time window. She documented who pulled the video when it was exported, how it was transferred, and she preserved the original file while working from a copy. Then she built a timeline. She matched the receipt and POS transaction time to the store video timestamps, and then matched those to dispatch and CAD records, showing when Walsh was sent to the store, when he arrived, and when he called for backup. That let her line up what the store cameras showed with what Walsh was telling dispatch in real time. After that, she pulled police video the correct way. She requested the full original Bodycam file, not a shortened clip or a view-only copy, and she requested the technical records tied to it: docking and upload records, file identifiers, and system access logs. That's where the case shifted. The store video stayed clear during the critical part of the encounter, including Walsh pressing Darius for ID near the exit, restricting his movement, and pushing the situation toward physical control while the manager was still verifying the purchase. Walsh's body cam did not stay intact during that same window. The most important portion was unusable. Lane didn't treat that as a simple camera issue and move on. She checked the file records. She pulled metadata tied to the recording and upload, and she pulled audit logs showing what actions were taken with the file. She also pulled workflow records to compare what normally happened to body cam footage versus what happened here. Those logs showed the body cam file had been handled outside the normal process. That meant it wasn't just a bad recording. The system recorded that the file was interacted with in a way that didn't match standard handling. Once she had that, she widened the review. She pulled Walsh's recent cases and looked for repeat markers, vague suspicion language in reports, unusually frequent claims of consent searches, low rates of charges after those searches, and body cam problems appearing around the same kinds of moments. The pattern was consistent. It looked like broad suspicion language was being used to justify stops. Searches were happening often without strong outcomes, and video issues clustered around searches, handcuffing, and later claims about resistance. While Lane was building the case, the department tried to keep the situation contained. Walsh was placed on administrative duty and ordered not to access any case-related material. He still attempted to access the case. The system logged the attempt. That access log changed the risk level immediately. Lane added it to the file and notified command through the chain. She then prepared a referral package that included the store video and POS confirmation showing no theft, the dispatch and CAD timeline showing how Walsh framed the situation on the radio, the body cam integrity issues supported by metadata and audit logs, Walsh's attempted access after being ordered not to, and a summary showing the pattern concerns were not isolated to one incident. At that point, it stopped being a simple internal discipline matter. The focus shifted to civil rights exposure and evidence integrity, and outside review moved quickly. Once Monica Lane's referral package left the department, things moved in a different lane. The issue was no longer whether Walsh used poor judgment in a store. The issue was whether he violated someone's rights and whether evidence was mishandled to protect him. The department tried one last round of quiet control. They kept Walsh on administrative duty, restricted his access, and avoided public statements beyond standard language. Internally, they acted like it could be handled with discipline and training, but the records didn't support that. Federal review focused on two tracks at the same time. First, the stop itself. Walsh treated Darius like a thief without a confirmed missing item, restricted his movement by positioning himself at the exit, and used non-compliance language to justify escalation while the store manager was actively verifying the purchase. Second, the evidence. The body cam failure during the critical window, the audit logs showing handling outside the normal workflow, and Walsh's attempted access after being told not to touch the case. That last part mattered more than people think. It showed intent and risk. You can argue about a bad decision in the moment. It is much harder to explain why evidence got handled wrong and why the officer later tried to get into the file. Walsh was terminated after the internal process concluded, based on policy violations tied to the stop and the evidence issues. The city and department had to move fast because by then, the case wasn't isolated. Lane's broader review had already surfaced a pattern in Walsh's unit: repeated vague suspicion language, high consent search claims with low charges, and video gaps clustering around the same high-risk moments. That pattern triggered a larger response. The unit was shut down and restructured. Supervisors were reassigned. Stop documentation requirements were tightened. Body cam audits became mandatory, not occasional. The department added stricter review around consent searches and required clearer articulation of the reason for stops, not generic language that could fit anything. Then the civil side hit. Once the unit pattern became visible, the city faced multiple civil suits tied to similar stop and search behavior. Some cases had the same story structure: vague suspicion, pressure tactics, searches with little outcome, and recording gaps at key moments. The city ended up settling multiple cases connected to that pattern because the records created exposure that was difficult to defend. On the criminal side, federal prosecutors brought civil rights and evidence-related charges against Walsh. The case was built around what could be verified: the store video and POS logs, the dispatch CAD timeline, the mismatch between what the store footage showed and what the body cam failed to capture, and the system logs showing unusual handling and attempted access. The point was not just that Walsh was wrong. The point was that he escalated without a proper basis, and then the evidence trail didn't stay clean. Walsh was convicted. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. And that outcome didn't happen because someone got loud or went viral. It happened because the record was preserved early, the evidence was secured properly, and the investigation was run in a way that held up under outside review. Darius's role became public during the process, not during the confrontation. He didn't use it to win the moment in the store. He used procedure to win the case afterward. He filed through the public channel, locked down preservation, recused himself, and let his deputy do the work. That's what prevented anyone from dismissing it as personal. Monica Lane's work became a model inside that department. The chain of custody steps, the timeline matching, the metadata pulls, the audit log review, the unit pattern analysis, and the documentation of Walsh's access attempt turned a messy incident into a provable case. The long-term change in Marston was concrete. Officers had to document stops with clearer factual basis. Supervisors had to review stops more consistently. Bodycam audits became routine and tracked. The department introduced stricter controls and alerts around bodycam file handling and access. The goal was simple: make it harder for vague suspicion to become a detention, and make it harder for evidence gaps to hide what happened. That's what accountability looks like when it's done the right way. Calm, documented, verified, and impossible to hand-wave away later. Now let me ask you something. If you were Darius in that store, would you have stayed as controlled as he did? Or would you have reacted the way most people would when an officer treats suspicion like proof? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever had a situation where the truth only mattered because you had the record, share that too. And if you want more stories where people stay calm, stick to facts, and the system is forced to answer for what it did, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.